Hi, I'm Chris Skinner, Chairman of the Financial Services Club and author of Digital Bank, a book that's been doing really well in the past 6 months because it's in a hot space. The space is called FinTech, and FinTech is where everybody's talking about right now. Before I start talking about FinTech itself, I have to first of all say a real apology to Duena and the organisers of NextBank. I should be there with you, but I got called to a cryptocurrency summit in New York with the political and economic leaders of America, and as a result it was conflicted. So Duena very kindly came to my house to film my presentation, and that's where we are now. I live in a museum, and that may seem strange for a guy who's focused on the future, but this is the historic museum of the Dockyard Trust in Chatham, Kent. It's a museum that is holding all of the history of our naval history of Britain, going back to the 16th century under Henry VIII. And this gate behind me was built in 1720, just after one of the major financial disasters of a bubble bursting in Britain due to investments going wrong. Is that what's going to happen with FinTech? Is this a FinTech bubble that's about to burst? Let's find out. So before I talk about the FinTech bubble bursting, or whether it will burst, let's talk about what a bubble is first. And maybe it's best represented by guys like the Marcus Wellesley here, the brother of the Duke of Wellington, who was involved in naval battles back in the 18th century. And in fact, just when this dockyard was coming into its own in 1720 was when one of the biggest bubbles burst, the South Sea Company bubble. The South Sea Company was created in 1711 by the government to pay off the national debt due to battles with France. And the government was actually bankrupt. So what they did is they created a public-private partnership with merchants to give a sole monopoly for trading in the South Seas, the South American region, with one company, the South Sea Trading Company. That company, as a result, when they issued shares in their first IPO, were oversubscribed to the amount of 10 times the value of the shares. That they therefore created more shares, and people bought them. By the mid-1710s, most of the MPs in the House of Commons, most of the peers in the House of Lords owned shares in the South Sea Company. It was only in about 1718, when they wondered where were the goods from the South Seas, that they realised that the South Seas Company had never been to the South Seas. They didn't trade there, they'd never actually been there. They had nothing. The company was worthless. People sold their investments, and they realised actually this was a company that was only valuable on paper. In reality, they were useless. Is that what FinTech is? A lot of companies that are valuable as an idea on paper, but in reality, they're all useless? Let's go find out by looking at the numbers. So let's look at the evidence for a FinTech bubble, and is it going to burst? Money 2020 last year estimated that this year, 2015, there will be $20 billion of investment in new FinTech startups. Silicon Valley banks say that between 2009 and 2013 there was $10 billion invested in new fintech startups that was representing 2,000 deals, 2,000 new companies, all focused on bringing technology into finance. Accenture are saying that the numbers show a tripling between 2008 and 2013, with $3 billion alone invested in 2013, and likely to be more than $8 billion of pure investment in new startups in 5 years. These numbers, they're different numbers. You can look at any number you want, but the numbers are big. And what they're all saying is that banking needs to be disrupted. It needs to be destroyed. It needs these new companies that are focused on cryptocurrencies, on big data, on cloud, on using new technologies to attack the incumbents and fight them. The question is, if it's time out and the battle begins, who's going to win? So now here I am on the bridge of the HMS Cavalier, one of the last surviving destroyer warships of the Second World War, built in 1944. And to me this represents the banking industry, and it's a massive investment in a massive infrastructure that has great armoury and can lob bombs over the side to blow up anyone who comes near them, to threaten the industry, to threaten the ship. And that's what's happening right now, because you see a lot of the banks are creating venture capital funds and incubators and capabilities to be part of the disruption, to actually cannibalize themselves. You've got HSBC, Sberbank, Santander, Citi, all creating venture capital funds. You've got BBVA, Swift, and many other banks creating challenges and creating capabilities to be part of identifying where the changes will come from, so that they can actually incorporate those changes into the core of the industry, into the core of this infrastructure, and therefore destroy the threat of the startups, the insects that buzz around. And that's exactly what I think is happening here. Will the destroyer destroy the startups? Before we can answer, is there a fintech bubble, is it about to burst, and are the fintech startups all going to be annoying little insects that get destroyed by the banking system, we need to look at the nuts and bolts of what's actually happening. So we've come into the main body of the HMS Ocelot. This is a submarine from the Cold War period of the 1960s that, as you can see behind me, has a torpedo shafts, so we can actually blast things out of the water if we want to. But we're not going to do that. What we're going to do is actually work out who's trying to blast the banks out of the water. And it really falls into three categories. The first is wrappers, and the second is replacers, the third are reformers. The wrappers are actually not that concerning. They're the people like Moven, Simple, and they're the guys like Apple Pay who are wrapping themselves around the banking system and creating a new way of taking out the friction of dealing with money. But they're not that important because they don't replace the system, they don't cause a problem for the core banking infrastructure. The people who cause the problem are the replacers, the people like the P2P lenders, the Zopas, the funding circles, the lending clubs of this world. Lending Club just IPO'd for $8 billion. And what you see happening there is that they're creating a replacement for banks through technology. It's called peer-to-peer. You connect the people with money, with those who need money, through a processor. The processor replaces the bank. That's what Bitcoin does. So cryptocurrencies is another thing that's arising where individuals through the technology are being connected direct, peer-to-peer. But Bitcoin is different. Cryptocurrencies are different because they are reformers. They're going to be a reformation of how we think of everything, because they're not dealing with money, they're dealing with digital value exchange. That is completely different to what we do in banking and financial services. It replaces banking and financial services with something new. And so really we need to look at what's happening is the replacement of the system by technology, where technology brings finance together with technology to create fintech, or a whole new reformation of the system into something that's not even fintech. It's called digital value exchange. And that to me is where we get into a really interesting debate. So now we're here in the control room of the HMS Ocelot, the 1960s submarine, which has this amazing technology that's about the same as most banks have in their back office. And that's where we're going to see the fundamental shift, that banks are renovating these old technologies to be ready and fit for the 21st century. But what are they becoming fit for? Is it to be a fintech competitor, or is it to be something else? And that's where I think we actually have the wrong focus right now, that fintech is not the focus. It's value exchange that's the criticality. And when you think of cryptocurrencies, that's a digital form of value exchange. It's nothing to do with money, it's to do with what we value. Facebook is something that stores our photographs and our memories. That has value. Twitter records all of our news and things that are of interest to us day by day. That has value. A lot of things have value, such as gamification, the investment you make in spending time playing a game like World of Warcraft. The gold that you've built in World of Warcraft has value. So really we should be focusing on the value exchange mechanisms rather than fintech. Fintech is just saying we're going to automate the old financial world. Value exchange mechanism says we're going to be fit for the future world. We're here in the engine room of the Ocelot. This is where the batteries powering this submarine made the system happen, made the system work. What's going to make the new system work of value exchange mechanisms in the digital world? Well, having talked about fintech versus value exchange mechanism, having talked about wrappers, replacers, reformers, what are we really seeing is a reformation of the whole way we think about the exchange of value, the whole way we think about the exchange of things between individuals and companies globally. And that reformation means that actually banking is no longer relevant. Insurance is no longer relevant. Fintech actually isn't that relevant. What's relevant is the new model of doing business, the new model army. What's that going to be? Some of it will be banks, some of it will be fintech startups. We don't know who are going to be the winners, but what we do know is that the investments are going into a whole new way of doing things. People like Mark Andreessen of Horowitz Andreessen Venture Capital Fund, people like Sir Richard Branson, people like Reid Hoffman, the founder of LinkedIn, are investing in these new model armies. They want to create a new model of doing value exchange, and that's the reason why they believe cryptocurrencies are so important. So Richard Branson says that cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin will create a global transformation in the whole payments industry. Meanwhile, someone like Mark Andreessen of Andreessen Horowitz is saying, I want to invest in a disruptive bank, and he's doing that. Meanwhile, the banks themselves are investing in disruption. We just saw BBVA, USAA, New York Stock Exchange investing in a new cryptocurrency-based business, $75 million to create their new engines of doing value exchange. And that's the reason this is exciting. It's not a fintech bubble, because fintech deals with the last century. It's a value exchange mechanism, reconstruction of the industry, using digital forces as the engines of the new world. Who's going to win? I don't know, but it's going to be very exciting to be involved. So having talked about value exchange mechanisms versus fintech, what will the world look like 10 years from now? Well, that's really hard to predict, even if you're a time traveller, but you can predict some things, particularly from a technology viewpoint, because 20 years ago we knew the technologies like mobile, biometrics, cryptocurrencies were coming. They're finally getting here. 10 years from now we can already see new exchange structures, new ecosystems developing, and these ecosystems are integrated financial exchange value management systems. They're not just financial, they're actually looking at likes, shares. They're looking at things like PewDiePie on YouTube, who makes $4 million a year just by producing videos about how to play games. So it's a new ecosystem where the incumbent institutions will partner with the new startups to deliver great services to their customers. It's called financial value systems integration. Value systems integration is what the incumbent banks will be doing. They'll be taking all of these great ideas and maybe saying, for peer-to-peer lending, we're going to partner with Zopa. For cryptocurrencies, we're going to partner with Ripple. For managing the whole of our global transaction volumes, we're going to be using Ripple. This is the new ecosystem. It's a value exchange mechanism. It's not a fintech community, and that's the reason why I don't believe we're going to see a fintech bubble burst, because there's no such thing as fintech. It's a value exchange mechanism ecosystem that's going to emerge, and 10 years from now, that's where we're going to be investing our dollars. I began this presentation at the gates of the dockyard, and now we've come to the most historic part of the dockyard that made the difference in the naval battles of the 18th century. This is the ropery. It's a 400-metre long space where we built ropes, and this is actually the technology that enabled Britain to build the British Empire, because ropes made the difference in naval battles. We had the technology here in this space to make the ropes and the rigging that made our ships far more robust than the French or the Spanish. And that's how we won battles, and how the HMS Victory created the foundation of what became the British Empire. The reason I've come back here is that we're in a reconstruction using technology today to create a new ecosystem, not a financial ecosystem, but a value exchange ecosystem. One that's global, that's digitized, not physical, that's localized. One that's based around the exchange of value as tokens rather than of money as value and currency. And this really gets into the heart of why I don't believe we're in a fintech bubble, but because fintech is actually irrelevant, as I mentioned already. It's a bit like in naval warfare. We were not in a rope bubble. We were in something that was reconstructing the system. We're in something right now that's reconstructing the system. And it's incredibly important to think of it as where we're going to be when that reformation happens and we're in that new world, and who's going to win. So I hope you're winners and that you don't end up as shipwrecks. And equally, I hope to see you next year at Next Bank Europe. Thank you very much.